All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar, which is hopefully at a perfect time in your business school journey. If you're applying this year, and if you're applying next year or the year after that, or the year after that, I'm glad you're here because it gives you a chance to kind of think things through beforehand. But today we're going to be talking about how to pick the right business schools for you. And that last part is what we're going to spend a lot of time on, right? How do you figure out which business schools are right for you? So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about who we are, who I am, the voice on the other side of the curtain. We're going to talk about risk. Risk is a really important part of this that I think a lot of people skip over. We're going to talk about the need for introspection. We're going to talk about frameworks and the roles they play. And we're going to talk about actually crafting that list. And then we're going to end with some Q&A. So as you kind of logged into this webinar, on the right-hand side, there's a little Q&A panel. I won't be looking at it throughout the webinar, but at the end, I'll be going through that and answering as many as I possibly can. So if I'm talking about something and you have a question that applies to you, or you want me to go into a bit more detail, please type it up, hit send, and we'll get to it at the end. I promise. So who are we? More specifically, who am I? My name is Bhavik. I'm the managing partner here at Critical Square. I'll be with you throughout the call. If you guys sign up for free consultations, chances are you'll speak to me. If not with me, then you'll speak to John or Eddie, the other partners here at the firm. And I think you guys know a little bit about what we do, but the reason we're holding this particular webinar is because this is a conversation we have with a lot of applicants, with a lot of potential applicants, a lot of clients. It's the very first step, right? And it's something that as we've helped hundreds of clients, well, thousands, I don't know, a lot of clients think through this. There are some things that have come to the top that are really essential to think about. And there's a way to think about it. So hopefully, as we hold this webinar, it's more than just talking about average GMATs and median GPAs and rankings. It's beyond that. It's about how do you think about this problem? How do you frame the problem? How do you structure the problem? And it's something that we've been very successful with. So, this isn't so much an advertisement as it is, here's why you should kind of pay attention and listen, because whether you work with us or you don't, this should be a very useful hour or so of your time. And if you are planning on working with us, our early bird ends Sunday. So we love people who get early starts to things. It shows a lot of dedication. So if you're going to sign up, do try to take advantage of that. But with that said, let's get into the meat of the things. Risk. Any good conversation around school selection doesn't start with schools. Schools and the programs and your lists, that's later, right? If you kind of remember the table of contents, we don't talk about schools until fourth or fifth on the list. Risk is where you need to start. Risk is going to be the crux of not only your school selection, but your application strategy as a whole. So what do I mean by risk? Well, generally speaking, there are three types of applicants. There's the daredevil, there's the adrenaline junkie, and there's kind of what we call the safe kid. And you might find yourself, somewhere in between. You might find yourself in different buckets from year to year. But wherever you find yourself, it's important to be honest with yourself and figure out which one speaks most to you at this point in time. So the daredevil, these are the people who, for a variety of reasons, are going hard, they're going aggressive, there's no room for safety in their school selection, they are in it for the top programs, and that's it, right? Really on a tightrope, really no support. They are, they're going to put forward their best applications possible, but they are at the mercy of some very, very difficult programs, right? The adrenaline junkie, this is where I would say a majority of people sometimes tend to find themselves. These are people who want to go big, right? They want to try, they want to push themselves, they want to try for some hard programs, but they're not quite the daredevils as the groups before, right? They do want maybe a safety or a few more target schools in their mix. They want, they want a pretty decent chance of converting. Whether it means they're applying to some safety or no safeties, but some targets, in addition to some stretch programs, whatever that might be. And then you have kind of the folks who like to play it safe, right? If that means, hey, I really like this one stretch program, I'm going to apply there, but everything else is going to be pretty safe. Or, hey, paying for this is going to be difficult. I really want to go somewhere that's going to give me some monetary support. Those are the individuals who tend to have a much more conservative portfolio of schools. But one of the things I mentioned was your risk profile can change, right? Your risk profile can change within the year, right? Maybe in round one, you're going to be the daredevil, but in round two, you're going to be the adrenaline junkie, or round one is the adrenaline junkie, round two is the safe kid in case things don't quite go your way. Or maybe you're young as an applicant and you want to say, hey, look, if I don't get in this year, that's okay. So this year I'm going to be the daredevil, and next year I'll have a more holistic strategy, right? Or maybe you start out the process and you think you can be very aggressive, and then later on you're like, well, I put in all this time and effort, I really want to make sure I convert. It's okay to change where you find yourself. But the most important thing I want you guys to take away from this slide is think about this. Always keep it in the front of your mind. Are you comfortable with the risk profile that you have designated for yourself? If that changes, are you comfortable with how your risk has changed, right? This is perhaps the most important thing that I would say 70% of the people we speak to haven't thought at all about. They may have paid some lip service to it, but this is a very serious question and one you guys should really, really, really think about. So once you've kind of thought about your risk profile, well, how do you do that, right? So can you afford to wait another year if you don't get it, right? What is the opportunity cost of that? What will you lose out by waiting another year? If you feel like you've been growing at your company and that growth is starting to plateau, then what you're missing out on is the opportunity cost of what you'll be doing post MBA. Or, maybe for some personal reasons, now is the time to go. And if you wait a year, that ship might have passed you by, right? Or, will your chances be higher or lower next year? Maybe you just started a new job, right? That makes your current profile pretty risky. So maybe by waiting another year, you'll have a higher shot of getting into a really good program. So asking yourself these questions, and if you notice, not all of these questions have to do, with purely on your chances. You are a young adult. Your adult life is just starting out. There are a lot of really big decisions in your future. An MBA is obviously a very, very large part of that. But there are other things, right? Maybe some of you are looking to get married, or some of you are looking to move, or maybe some of you are looking to have children. Whatever, whatever that might be, there are a lot of things to consider, especially when you're thinking about risk in business school. So that leads, that risk conversation with yourself should lead you to a very natural secondary stage. And that secondary stage is going to be around looking within yourself, right? Knowing what you want. Because this is a very difficult process to go through if you haven't given this, much thought. So first, know where you're headed, right? This seems intuitive, but you would be surprised at how quickly this can be glossed over by even the most serious and effective applicants. Know your goals. What are you trying to do in the short term? What are you trying to do in the long term? What are the things you need to go from where you are to where you're trying to be? having a clear path mapped out, and let me just be the first to say, what you put in your story and your applications doesn't have to be 100% what you end up doing, right? It'll change, life changes, maybe you'll find something new or interesting, but what you put in your story should have a kernel of truth, right? It should utilize the experiences and the skills you bring to the table now in a realistic and ambitious way going forward. We have a series of videos around kind of communicating career goals. So if that's something you want to watch a little bit more on, I recommend you head over to our website and catch those videos. But maybe there's 3 or 4 different paths ahead of you, and maybe A and B are a bit more likely than C or D, but you're still interested in C or D. Knowing what opportunities you're willing to explore and you want to explore will help you understand the industry and career alignment and what you need out of this MBA program and experience to really figure out which schools are going to be right for that. Because you don't want to have path A, let's say path A is very healthcare centric, and so you pick all of your schools based on something healthcare centric, and one of the other paths was maybe ending up on Wall Street, right? Maybe there were some schools that weren't as into healthcare as some of the ones you picked, but they gave you broader opportunities down the road. They kept more doors open. So knowing kind of where you're headed is a really important conversation to have, and it's important to kind of map out. So that's part of it, right? The other part of it is, well, what kind of MBA program? There are a lot of options out there, right? There are full-time programs. Within full-time programs, there's 1-year programs, 2-year programs, 16-month programs that don't have internships. Then there are part-time and weekend programs that are for working professionals, right? Then there's executive programs, there's online programs. So which one, now that you kind of know where you want to be in your career, personally, professionally, now what kind of program are you going to pick to kind of fit in with that goal, right? So what is your comfort with the financial opportunity costs? A full-time program is really, really expensive because A, it has a large price tag, and B, you're not working. And so you're gonna lose a lot of money, quote unquote lose a lot of money. The opportunity cost is significantly high. An online program, on the other hand, may be far cheaper and fit in with your life a little bit better, but will it really provide the experience you're looking for, right? So another question, where are you personally in your life? And how will this education play a role? If you're married and you have children, going full-time can be a really scary thing. And sometimes part-time and weekend programs can be a great alternative. But depending on where you live, you may not have access to really impressive part-time and weekend programs. If you're living in Chicago or the Bay Area or the Philadelphia area, you've got some great part-time programs that you can attend. But if you're living in Iowa, right, you don't have as many options. And so that's something to keep in mind, which is, yes, one of these options may be more convenient than the other, but it's still a lot of money. It's still an investment. Are you going to get the right returns out of that investment? So where are you in your career and which options are open to you? So this one is a bit less about what you want and more about what you can actually get, right? So let's say you're 26 and you're looking to apply to an MBA program. You can go full-time, you can go part-time. You might be young for part-time, but not super young. You could maybe go for a part-time program. But an executive program isn't really on the table for you. On the flip side, let's say you're 38 or 39, which is pretty old for full-time, and actually fairly old for part-time and weekend as well, but might be right up the alley for an executive or an online program. So understanding how you fit into these class profiles and these class demographics is important, and making sure, once again, that you understand risk is a good thing to overlay, right? For example, if you say, hey, I know I'm 36, but I'm going to apply to full-time programs, but I'm a very conservative risk profile. Now you're saying some contradictory things, right? The chances of a 36-year-old getting into a full-time prestigious MBA program are kind of low. They're not non-existent, but they're low, right? And so now where, the types of programs aren't quite fitting your risk profile, and so there's a lot of matching up to do here. And which options will give you the opportunities, networks and experiences you're looking for, right? Maybe part-time and weekend really fit with your life, but you really want the experiences of a full-time program. Or maybe an online degree is easy to get for you personally, but you really want to be around people, and so maybe a part-time program is better. Wherever you are in your life, wherever you are in your career, you have to think about these options as two-way streets, right? Will this type of program think I'm a valuable candidate? And is this program going to give me more than just 3 letters after my name? Is it going to give me those opportunities and networks and experiences and fun and knowledge that I want, that I need to get from point A to point B? So thinking about the right type of program is a good next step. If you're in technology now and you want to grow in your role, maybe a part-time program's great. But if you're in technology now and you want to go to investment banking, maybe full-time's right. So there's a lot of things to consider here, and I would suggest kind of keeping those in mind. But now you've thought about your risk, you've thought about what you want to be when you grow up, and you've thought about the different types of programs that are offered that are out there and how those might fit in. So now how do you really start thinking about the programs that are out there? Well, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? Between what's being taught and how it's being taught, where the school is and how long it is, what kind of jobs you want. There's a million things to consider, right? So what we'll do, for the next few slides is we'll go through some of those things, some of the more important things. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's a really good summary of what I would consider to be some of the more important factors to keep in mind. But then we'll talk about what to actually do with all that data, how to make sense of it, right? So if you stick with me through the next few slides, as we get to the next section around frameworks, we'll start putting all of these things together. So, all right, you've got all of these things. You've got this word cloud in front of you with all these fancy colors. All right, where do you start, right? Well, some of the things to keep in mind. You're there to get a job, right? Most people are there for their career. Very few people go to an MBA simply to party. So career opportunities are probably a pretty important thing for you, right? So think about your industry and company alignment, right? Certain schools may place more people into certain industries or companies than others. Certain industries don't hire below a certain ranking, right? So for example, if you're looking to get into tier 1 consulting or investment banking, they have cutoffs below which their recruiting teams tend not to go. So if one of your main things is to have on-campus recruiting opportunities, then having that company actually come to that school is important, right? Generally speaking, top 10, top 15 is where the tier 1 institutions start, kind of phasing out their slots in their recruiting teams. So think about, think about the companies and the placements, and think about, what industries are in that region that might find that school to be valuable, right? Schools don't operate in a vacuum, right? They operate in their region. They are shaped by the economy that surrounds them. So for example, there's a lot of oil and gas in the southwest of the United States. Great. If you go to UT Austin, you're in big oil's backyard. Or if you go to Columbia, you're a stone's throw from Wall Street. Now, does that mean these schools are only known for that? No, of course not, right? But these schools do have certain advantages in terms of alignment with certain industries and companies. But once you've thought about which companies are hiring, which industries are that particular school might be better at than others, and what the placement rates are, you also have to think about your strength in getting those jobs, your chances of getting those jobs. And what do I mean by that? So let's say your goal is to get into a top tier consulting firm. All right, so you have two options in front of you. You have Harvard and you've got Tuck. Now, let's say you're a pretty good candidate. You're pretty competitive, right? But Tuck and Harvard aren't in the same tier of school. And the pond is much, much, much bigger at Harvard, right? Class size 900 or so versus a class size in the mid 200s at Tuck. So your chances statistically of rising to the top, being the big fish in that pond at Tuck, are much higher than your chances of being the same at Harvard. So counterintuitively, if your goal is very much career focused, you might be better off going to Tuck. Now, granted, we always say go with the better brand, the better tier, but those kinds of things are important, right? You don't want to end up playing second string at Harvard when you could have been playing first string at Tuck. And lastly, this one's sometimes important, sometimes not. Visiting executives. If you're in a big city or you go to a great school, you're going to have a lot of great speakers and a lot of great alumni. So what else should you think about beyond just jobs? Well, what about school, right? You're there to learn. You're going to be taught. So what's the method, right? Is it case only? Is it lecture? Is it predominantly experiential? Is it a mix? I think a lot of people have a fascination with case-only schools, and I think a large part of that is driven by Harvard. But the fact of the matter is, the case method doesn't work for everyone. It's actually really ranked lowly in terms of students in their first year. And it's ranked even lower by students who have non-business backgrounds. So if you're an engineer and you've been in an engineering heavy role, and all of a sudden you're trying to learn advanced business concepts by utilizing a case method that assumes you already have a base understanding in the foundations, your learning curve is going to be astronomical. So think about that. Think about what you bring to the table and what you need. Sometimes you just need to be taught things in a slide deck. Maybe you'd like to get your hands dirty, and maybe experiential is more important than case. Also important to consider the faculty, right? Not necessarily how many Nobel laureates do they have, but who's teaching and what are their credentials. Right? If you're going to be learning from these folks, you should feel very confident in their ability to teach you cutting edge things. Think about the workload. How busy are you going to be? Right? Think about the class size. Are these large classes? Are these small classes? Which one do you prefer? There's no right answer. It's not like, hey, a class size of 60 is terrible and a class size of 20 is ideal. No, some people may prefer 60 and some people may prefer 20. So know yourself. Also, think about the broader structure of the school and the program. How long is the program? Right? We talked a little bit about this on the slide around different types of programs, but even within full-time, you have 1 year, you have 16, 22 months, you have the kind of 2-year programs. Some, the longer ones will have internships. For example, if you start with Columbia's J-term, you won't have an internship. If you do the 1-year program, you'll start in the summer and then kind of fall right in with the second years. Think about how that plays in. Right? If you're trying to go from your current role into consulting and you don't have an internship, or you're trying to get into banking and you don't have an internship, it's going to be really difficult. And by really difficult, I mean nearly impossible. So really think about what the program length does for your career, because a lot of people get kind of caught up with the cost. Yeah, a 2-year program is, well, twice as expensive. But if a 1-year program doesn't get you where you're trying to go, then has it really worked out for you? Think about the term length. Are you on a semester system? Are you on a quarter system? Those kinds of things matter. Think about how large the program is overall. Like I said, Harvard, 900 or so, Tuck, 250 or so, really different experiences. Think about the cross-campus and joint degree opportunities. A lot of programs have fantastic schools outside of their business, outside of the business schools. So if you're interested in getting a dual degree, think about where you might want to do that. Or if you're looking to not necessarily get a dual degree, but just take classes in another school or collaborate with people in other departments, is the school well known for those? And think about exchange programs as well. Maybe you don't want to spend your whole time in your MBA program in that one city and you want to go abroad. Look at what sister institutions they have. So those are some of those things. What else should you keep in mind? Well, you're spending 2 years there. You're going to at some point have to have fun, right? And you're going to want to enjoy your time. It's a lot of money. It's going to be a long 2 years if you don't like where you are and you don't like the people around you. So think about the culture. Is it competitive? Is it collaborative? Is it easygoing? Are a lot of people more prone to stick around campus and hang out with other MBA students? Are they more prone to kind of find their own things? That leads naturally to location. If you're in a small town, you kind of have no choice. Sometimes in larger cities, there's a draw to extend away from the campus. But maybe you're not a small town guy or gal, right? Maybe you want to be in a big city. Or maybe you've been in big cities your entire life and you want to have an experience that's a bit more, in a bubble. Maybe you don't want to be in Boston, you want to be in Hanover or Charlottesville or Durham, wherever that might be. There's no right answer, but know what kind of experience you want. And things like location will very much dictate your experience. Look at the social atmosphere, right? What kind of things do people there do for fun? Are those things that you would also like to do for fun, right? If you're moving with a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a wife or a husband, are they going to like it there, right? 2 years is a really long time to have your significant other miserable in a new location or jobless, right? So think about your partner as well. This is obviously a very big step in your life, but if you're moving with your partner, they have a say in this as well. Think about facilities, right? A lot of new facilities are coming up at some of the biggest institutions across the U.S., across the world. For example, Columbia's new building, the plans look beautiful. It's going to be up in 2017, I think. Some schools already have new facilities in place. So think about, how important your surroundings are to you, right? Second to last, but definitely not least, and perhaps one of the most important things, think about your curriculum, right? Think about how the core is structured. So, for example, if you don't come from a business background, then maybe you want a very structured core where everyone goes through the same thing at the same time, right? Maybe you want to do marketing 101 followed by accounting 101. But maybe you do come from a business background or you come from a business accelerated career and you kind of want to customize your experience. Then look at places that are flexible. Look at what electives are offered. Are those electives in line with kind of your interests? Do they come at a time when you can make the most out of them, right? So for example, if you have a 1-year fixed core, you won't start your electives until your second year, so after your internship. But if you're at a flexible program, you might be able to take an elective, you might be able to take many electives actually in your first year. So think about kind of when you want to take things, how they fit into your overarching academic plan. As I mentioned, timing of the degree requirements, right, is kind of the point there. Specialties and concentrations, think about if you are interested in specific things, think about what value these specialties or concentrations might have. Sometimes the value is as little as they send a signal and they're something you can put on your resume. Sometimes some schools are very, very, very known and very powerful in certain areas, and going to that school and learning from those professors can have a huge impact on your capabilities. And think about grade non-disclosure. A lot of top schools are starting to implement this, and it's a great way, if you're there to learn, it's a great way to push yourself, right? You're not worried about your GPA. You can take a few more risks academically. It can be a very powerful thing. Now, on the flip side, if a lot of times what will happen is people will think grade non-disclosure is a great idea until they get to school, and then they'll realize that grades matter very much to them, in which case having grade non-disclosure as a criteria didn't really matter, right? So grade non-disclosure can be great for the right kinds of people. So last, statistics. This is last for a reason, right? And I think a lot of people start with the stats, but you should probably be ending with the stats, right? What is the rankings, the reputation, the GMAT, GPA, the class demographics, the costs? Those are important things. And a lot of these things like the GMAT, GPA, etc., class demographics will factor into whether these are stretch or aligned or safety schools for you specifically, but they're not there for you to consider what is and is not important to you. Right? What's important to you out of an experience has nothing to do, or shouldn't have anything to do, necessarily with the rankings or how much this might cost. Although things like that are important for specific instances and specific people, which is fine. So those are 6 fairly broad buckets. These are things to keep in mind. Like I said, it's not an exhaustive list. But it should get the conversation started. It should get you moving in the right direction. So you have all of these things, right, to think about. How do you make, how does it kind of play out in real life, right? So I want to kind of walk through, what we glibly call a tale of 4 programs, and they're super different, right? If you look across certain factors, programs tend to be similar. So for example, let's say type of, method of teaching. Well, Harvard and Darden are both case, right? But Booth is a mix and Kellogg is a mix. Booth has grade non-disclosure, Kellogg does not. University of Virginia is in a small town. All of the other 3 are not. Harvard has a class size of 900, Booth, Kellogg closer to 500. Each of these programs also have a different kind of experiential component to it. Darden is known as kind of a boot camp. You're going to work harder at Darden than pretty much any of these other 3 programs, or you're going to go really deep into your materials and coursework at Booth than you might at Kellogg. Right? If you want to stay at the higher level, if you want to stay at breadth, then Kellogg might be fine. But if you want to be at a place where you're going to be forced to go many levels deeper, then maybe Booth is right. Neither of those is, good or bad. It's just people have different desires out of these experiences. Maybe you don't feel like you fit in at Harvard and you feel like you're a better fit at Kellogg. That's fine. They're both really great programs, and if you feel more comfortable at one versus the other, then that's a pretty strong gut feeling, right? There's a lot of, each of these programs also have various strengths in kind of cross-campus opportunities, right? University of Chicago, great law school, great medical school, a lot of sciences there. So think a little bit about how you're going to go through the process, and don't just look at these schools and say, oh, well, I want to apply to the top 5, so I'm going to apply to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, Booth, whatever. They're incredibly different programs, and I can't even count the number of people who say, oh, well, I'm going to apply to, I applied to Harvard and Stanford and Wharton. And you go, well, why those 3? Well, they're ranked highly. They're entirely different programs, right? I don't think you can find 2 programs more different than Harvard and Stanford. They attract entirely different types of people. So think carefully beyond just the rankings about what may or may not be important to you, and you'd be kind of surprised at what shakes out of it. So that was just an example to kind of bring some of those more esoteric concepts to roost with specific schools. But you have all of these things that you're considering. You've got to find a way to make sense of it all. If you don't, you've got all these puzzle pieces lying everywhere, and it's like trying to trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle without seeing the picture. That's impossible. You have no idea if this is supposed to be flamingos or the Notre Dame Cathedral, right? You have no idea. Well, maybe that was a bad idea, bad example. Flamingos are pink, Notre Dame Cathedral is not, but it's chaotic. There's so much data. You're looking at all these websites. You're talking to all these students. Everyone's telling you how great their school is. You're overwhelmed, right? You're overwhelmed, and it really is going to lead to an analysis paralysis just by the sheer volume of inputs you're getting. So the way around that is before you start doing your research, before you start having all these conversations and etc., you want to create a framework. So a framework doesn't need to be complex. It has to be actionable. So if you're, for example, if you're a consultant watching this webinar, don't bust out the Excel and create this massive model that weights everything. It has to be useful for you, and sometimes keeping it simple can help you do that. But step one, it's simple, right? You have all of these factors that are out there. Figure out which ones are important to you, and don't try to rank order them. Rank ordering them can be it's like splitting hairs, right? But bucket them, right? Like, hey, I really care about career placement, and I really care about my curriculum. That's tier one. And then tier two, I kind of care about the size of the class, and the faculty, whatever those buckets might be, but they'll give you directional guidance, right? They'll help you kind of filter these things into slots. So now that you've gotten all these factors, and you put them into buckets, determine kind of the relative weightage, right? It doesn't have to be tier one is worth 27%. Don't go crazy with it, but is tier one twice as important? Is it only a little bit more important, right? It'll help you kind of think about the gaps between these tiers. Because if a school maybe has a lot of really great tier one things to offer, but maybe only a handful of tier two, depending on how much gap there is between these buckets, that might be a better option than a school that has a few in both, right? So kind of think about what your internal scoring mechanism is. And then start conducting your research, right? Start filling in these blanks, right? Hey, curriculum's really important. Let me go find out what the curriculum is at Harvard and at Stanford and at Wharton and at Booth, right? Or let me figure out what the curriculum is at these schools, or let me faculty is at those schools, or let me figure out what the career placements are for the types of things I want to be doing. And if there's anything you're missing in that massive matrix that you've not got, it's great. You see white space. Go fill that white space. Maybe have a conversation. Maybe dig a little bit deeper. But it's not only a way to structure the information you're getting, but it's also a way to find out what information you still need. And that can be a really powerful tool versus, hey, I spoke to this one guy at Duke, and so I have a bunch of notes from that, and those are filed over here. And I spoke to this girl from Kellogg, and those notes are filed over here, and I have no way of comparing them. A framework helps you get around that. And that's really, really, really valuable. So once you have all of this data, all of these frameworks, trying to make sense of it, well, now you need to make a list, right? Depending on where you were in the risk profile, right? And if you remember our risk profile personas, it was the daredevil, right? It was the adrenaline junkie, and it was the safe kid. Depending on what those which personas resonate with you, you're going to start putting together your stretch, aligned, and safety programs. And maybe, if you're the adrenaline junkie, maybe you won't have any safety. Or maybe if this is your first year applying and you want to be very aggressive, maybe you won't have any aligned or safety, right? Maybe you'll be all stretch. Whatever, right? The risk profile aspect of this will help you figure out how many schools in each of these buckets you should be applying to, across which rounds, across which years, etc. But now you have these schools, right? And let's say, what it's come down to is Wharton's a good fit, and Booth's a good fit, and Tuck is a good fit, and Johnson's a good fit. Arbitrarily selected, so don't try to find common ground, just for an example. right? And you are stretching a little bit for Wharton and Booth, so those would be your stretch schools. But you're far more aligned with with Tuck and Johnson. You're a bit safer for. All of these factors on the bottom half of this slide will help you figure that out, right? Is your GMAT above or below the median? Are you from an overrepresented applicant pool or an underrepresented applicant pool? Are you a diversity candidate? Where did you go for your undergrad? What was your major and your minor? What kind of leadership experience do you have? Did you work for blue chip companies? How old are you? Do you have any certifications? Do those certifications mean anything? Right? So for example, you have CFA level 2, that's far better than some technical certificate. How involved have you been? Do you have leadership involvement, or do you have involvement that has led to impact and that has scope? If you don't, if it's completely blank, that's a pretty big flag, and that might put a lot of schools into the stretch zone. Do you have awards? Do those awards compare you to just a handful of people or a lot of people? What kind of experience have you had professionally? What's your story? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? It's really difficult, right? That's the problem. Finding the right schools for you is actually, it just takes a lot of legwork. Putting all of that together into a list and matching that with your personal risk profile is super difficult. That's a lot of, we spend a lot of time talking to clients about that. There's a reason why, it's a phone call, right? When we talk to our clients about school selection, because it's not something you go back and forth on email about. You have to talk to somebody. You have to dig deeper into what they want. So if you're at the stage where you kind of know the schools, or you just need to figure out where you might land, or what kind of, what might move stretch to align to safety for you, reach out to us. We're happy to chat. We do free consultations a lot. Whether you're planning on working with a consultant or not, right? We're here to help. And so, don't be shy. Fill out the form. We'll chat. And if at the end of our time together, all we've done is answer your questions, then that was time well spent from our perspective. So, like I said, don't be shy. There's a lot of stuff here, and sometimes it's really difficult to step back from your own profile and go, well, I have this certification, or I have this involvement. How does that compare me to everyone else out there? We've done this for a while, right? We get it. We see a lot of applications pass through our door. We know kind of where you stand. So with that said, we'll move into the Q&A. So if you will excuse me for just a moment, I'm going to pop open the questions dialog, and we'll see what one of you mentioned you're an adrenaline junkie. That's fantastic. I'm glad. And one of the things that I will say is all of you should have a little bit of the adrenaline junkie in you, right? Whether you are, you've done this a couple of times on your own, and you're kind of sick of it, or if this is your first time, whatever that might be, you should really stretch yourself a little bit, right? Because the worst that can happen is that they say no. That's okay, right? But if you don't apply, you're saying no on their behalf, which is, well, terrible, right? I mean, why would you possibly do that? So definitely kind of ramp yourself up. You're awesome. Believe in yourself and apply to a couple of stretch schools, and maybe you'll get in, and that would be amazing, right? There's a question here addressed for Eddie. I am incredibly sorry to disappoint, but this is only Bhavik. I don't have the wondrous hair that Eddie does. He's the face. But you mentioned, where can you find a recording? After this, you'll get an email. All of our previous webinars are recorded and on our YouTube channel. They're also on our website. So there you go. And by the way, on our website, there's a ton of free resources. There's school profiles, there's short videos that answer a bunch of your questions. There are essay tips and resume tips, and perspectives from current students. check it all out. It's all free. You don't have to like give us your email address or anything. But it's there to help you. So, what are the schools in the top 15 that have grade non-disclosure? One of the things that I should mention, that's an important point, and I'll answer that in just a moment. Grade non-disclosure is not something schools generally themselves authorize. It's generally something that the students have come together and kind of decided that they want, right? The benefit to that is sometimes, so for example, the graduate business school, commission or whatever at the school will have decided they'll vote on this every year, right? It's there to kind of make the process a little bit less competitive in a way that allows people to really focus on what sets them apart in the interview process. So, there are pros and cons to it. I would say, be careful with that. But I mean, of note, right? Booth has it, Wharton has it, Stanford has it, Yale has it. A lot of these schools do have grade non-disclosure, and there's more and more are starting to do it. And the reason behind that is simply grades matter, but they kind of don't. So, and I do want to kind of go back to the point I'd made earlier. When you think about grade non-disclosure, make sure that you personally, as a human being, can take advantage of grade non-disclosure. There are a lot, from when you were 5 years old until now, grades have mattered in everything you have done, right? At business school, that's really not the case. So if you can come to a grade non-disclosure school and just be there to learn and take full advantage and be okay with getting a 3.0, then you're going to get a lot out of that grade non-disclosure component. But a lot of people aren't that way. They want to be that way, but they're not. Let's see. There's a question here that I don't quite understand. But I'll do my best to kind of answer it. It says, do schools draw quality judgments from having disparate school selections in rounds 1 and 2? I assume, and if I'm wrong, you can type this in, I assume you're talking a little bit about people who, on the application itself, talk about which other schools they're applying to. Yes, schools very much do draw, they draw some insight from that list. So be very careful with what you put in, right? If you're going to say, one of the things we see a lot is people will say, oh, well, they're applying to, let's say, Tuck. And they say, I'm applying to Tuck because the most important thing to me is the close-knit community. And then the next question will be where are you applying? And they'll say, oh, well, I'm applying to Harvard and Columbia and Stern. Well, if community is that important to you, then why aren't you applying to small schools, right? So if that's what you meant, and I apologize if I misunderstood, but if that's what you meant, then yes, if you make one claim and then your school list contradicts that claim, that's going to be pretty rough for you. All right, let me find our next question. Oh, good. That was your question. Great. Perfect. Here's when we get a fair amount. So a lot of times when we're having, when there's free consultations or it's on school selection, a lot of times people will say, hey, well, if I'm not quite sure where these schools fall for me, how should I go about applying to them? There are a couple of ways, right? So if you think you're going to be more aggressive this year, for example, but you're okay with not getting in, then you pick just your stretch and your aligned schools, right? Just the schools that if you got in, you would be happy to go to. But if you then throw in a safety school just to see what happens, now you've kind of muddied up the water, right? Because now you might have a school or a school admission in hand that makes you think, well, it's not a bad school, maybe I'll go, right? Where you go or where you apply and the types of schools that might match your profile are going to have an influence in terms of kind of the decision-making process at the end. So don't sabotage yourself at the very beginning by picking the wrong schools to apply to. That's why risk is super, super important. Somebody else who is looking for Eddie. I'm sorry, this is Bhavik. So this is a fairly common question as well. This is about the GMAT. This individual has 700. They're looking to apply to a top 10, and they're asking if they should retake it to get at least a 720. That's a really difficult question to answer just kind of first blush, right? Without knowing really anything about kind of what you do or your GPA, your GMAT, or your where you went to school or what you do for a living. But generally speaking, when we assess profiles, when we assess what might be a stretch or a safety or an aligned program, we think of it in there are 4 buckets for the profile, right? There's the academics, there's your professional experience, there's your involvement, and then there's your story. If any one of those is weak, then the other 3 have to take up the slack, right? Because the pressure is the same. Right? To get in, the pressure is the same. So if you're going to have a low GMAT, then you have to have something. And by the way, remember, GMATs affect rankings. If you're going to have a low GMAT, then you need to have something in your profile that would make them okay with a slightly less than median GMAT, or maybe a lot less than median GMAT. But if you can retake the GMAT, you should always retake the GMAT, right? Because that's the one thing that's under your control, right? You don't want to be in a position where you're applying and you're saying, hey, look, I know I'm going to hit your rankings a little bit, but here's why you should accept me, right? What you want to be able to say is, hey, look, I've got all these awesome experiences that's going to make me an amazing addition to your class, and I've got this awesome GMAT score, right? That's a much stronger application. So it's one of those things where, every school publishes their median, then every type of applicant pool has their own kind of sub-median, and then you got this 80 percentile range, etc. Don't worry. If you're in range, that's good, right? Like if you have in this particular question, you have a 700, that's fantastic. That's a great score. But if you think you can get a 720, you should always try to get that 720. The only thing I would caution is there might be an opportunity cost if you have to study again between that and your application. So kind of keep that in mind. All right, let's see. Oh, that's a wonderful question. So this person's asking, if you got dinged in the last cycle, how do you find the areas you need to work upon, especially if the school doesn't provide any feedback? Well, that's frustrating, right? You put a lot of time, you put a lot of effort, a lot of sleepless nights waiting for results. They ding you and then they just kind of walk away from you. So I definitely understand how frustrating that can be. You're gonna have to do 2 things. One, you're gonna have to take off you're gonna put on your very honest glasses, and 2, talk to other people, show them your application, get their reactions. That's one of the main reasons why firms like ours offer ding reviews, because it's kind of hard when you're so in the weeds with your own applications to be like, I'm going to objectively step back and figure out what went wrong. And sometimes you don't know, right? Sometimes it's very obvious, right? Like, hey, the median GMAT was a 720, I got dinged, I had a 680, that's probably part of it, right? By the way, AJAC, which is the International Association for Admissions Consultants, of which we're members, did a survey and they asked what the reasons were that people got dinged. The #1 reason was the GMAT. So if there's something blatantly obvious, that might do it. But sometimes, I had a free consultation just this morning with a girl who had applied last year. She had done fairly decently well, gotten to an interview stage with a couple of different schools, but hadn't quite been able to convert a school she wanted. And she was very enthusiastic in sharing her goals with me and her story. But about 10 minutes into it, I had found numerous holes in her story. So things like that, she when she came to the conversation, she didn't think the story was the weakness, right? So sometimes an external perspective, whether it's a consultant or it's just a friend or a colleague, try to get other people to look at it, right, and see what they think. Okay, so here's a question about the value add of like Coursera and MOOCs in general. The question is, do they help kind of with the skills? Yes and no. I mean, a lot of schools are starting to ask, for you to list which MOOCs you've taken. If you have a poor transcript, so if you have low grades, Coursera is not the way to go. You need to take actual classes and you get the actual grades. But if there's a particular industry or a particular function or a particular subject that you're very interested in, and you want to take, you've been taking courses because it's a personal passion of yours, then that's fine, right? You should list it. It'll add a little bit of flavor to your application. It won't necessarily move the needle, right? It's not going to say, oh, this person has a 700, not a 720 on their GMAT, but look at all these Coursera courses they've taken. Generally speaking, that won't help, right? But if the difference is between somebody who has a 720 and hasn't taken any and somebody who has a 720 and has taken some and everything else is equal, maybe it'll move the needle somewhat. But I would be careful to not overdo them, because there's an opportunity cost to Coursera in terms of what else you can be spending your time on that might actually move the needle more, and two, making sure that it aligns with your story and fills the gaps that you're actually trying to fill. So that is the last of the questions that I have. If somebody has any others, they're welcome to throw them in. And once again, if you have questions after this and you want to talk one-on-one, sign up for a free consultation. They're free, so it's kind of time with us where you get to ask anything you might not want to ask on a webinar, and it'll give us a chance to kind of dig into your profile a bit as well. But thank you all for joining. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. For those of you who are in Asia, hey, it's super early. I appreciate you guys joining. For those of you in the US and Europe, have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you in the next webinar series. Have a great one, guys.